Alright, so we're working on the Mustang again, trying to get a drive shaft made. But before we get the drive shaft made, we have to change out this pinion flange. This is the GT pinion flange, and the GT drive shaft is kind of weird. It's got a CV joint on this side. It's got a universal joint on this end. It's got a carry. Some of them have carry bearings in the middle of them, and we don't want to deal with any of that. So what I'm going to do is take this pinion flange off. I got this pinion flange just off of a 2003-2004 Mustang SVT Cobra. It should go right on this rear end, just like that. Replace that one. Then this flange bolts directly to the V6 drive shaft that used to be in this car. So I have the V6 drive shaft end that's going to go on this end, on this new flange. And then I have the yoke that came with this transmission right here. So we're going to take both of those to the drive shaft shop, give them a measurement for the length, and then they're going to make us a custom drive shaft. But first I got to get this off, get the new one on so we can get our correct measurement, because it sits at a different spot than this one. So we'll get working on that. Alright, so we got it all apart. Pulled the seal out. We got a new seal to stick in here. I'm going to put the new flange on. Tighten it down to exactly the same spot the old one was. You do not want to over tighten it because there's a crush washer in here and you don't want to crush it anymore. So you want to get it down to exactly where the old one was and stop. Alright, so we couldn't get it on with just the hammer. Ended up using this piece of pipe with this aluminum thing on the end. Put that on there like that, fits around the outside, and hammer it in. So now that's all the way in, and I can put the flange on. Alright, new flange is fully installed. There it is, new seal, new flange. So now we're going to get the V6 drive shaft, get it put up in here, start getting some measurements made for the new drive shaft. Alrighty, so we got the measurement, took the parts to the drive shaft shop, dropped it off. So while that's getting made, I'm going to be working on some other things on the car. Just pulled the cover off the diff, check everything out inside, change the fluid. Since I changed the seals on the front, we're going to do a fluid change, all that while we're in here, checking everything out, making sure it all looks good, make sure all the teeth look good, everything looks fine. So we're going to seal that cover back on there and go get some fluid, fill it back up. Alright, rear end has been fully serviced, new fluid, cover is back on, tightened down, new flange, new seals, should be good to go. So next step, while the drive shaft is out getting worked on, we're going to pull this thing off the lift, start working on fuel lines, wiring, clutch lines, all kinds of stuff like that. Just got a bunch of parts coming for all that stuff. So we're going to get this up, start working on all of that stuff. Alright, so we got the car back on the ground. Trying to get it fired up today in the car, just get it running. Obviously it's not going to have an exhaust, not going to have a coolant system. We just want to make sure it can run in the car, start getting wiring figured out, start getting all that figured out. So first step is I need to get that intake manifold, the LS3 intake manifold, actually mounted to the engine. It was just sitting there before. So I have the LS3 manifold here, the factory truck manifold here, and what I'm doing right now is getting the injectors situated. So I've removed the injectors from the truck fuel rail and started putting them in the LS3. Now, the LS3 injectors are different. Here's a factory truck injector. I don't have an LS3 injector because I got this intake manifold with nothing, pretty much. So what I'm doing to fit the injectors into the LS3 manifold, I have the LS3 fuel rail right here. To return this fuel rail just has a feed, and that's it, which is good because that's how the factory Mustang set up. It just has a feed, it's a returnless system. So here is the stock truck injector. Here is my modified truck injector. So what I'm doing to put it in the LS3 intake manifold, if you take the truck injector and just stick it in, it's all loose, it wobbles, it's not going to make a good seal there. So I pull this cap off right here, this little orange cap. You can see all the ones I pulled off. I pull the factory O-ring off, and then there's a groove right here behind the factory O-ring, and I have an O-ring that fits, if it'll focus, that fits right in that groove. It's a black O-ring, it's kind of hard to see, but it fits right in that groove. It's right there. It's bigger than the factory one that's on that one, and if you put it in the LS3 manifold, that O-ring seats nicely in there. It's nice and snug. All this bottom O-ring is doing, of course, once the fuel rail's on, it pushes down on these so they cannot come out, but all this bottom O-ring's doing is sealing, creating helping you not, or stopping you from getting a vacuum leak. If it was loose in there, it doesn't hold any fuel pressure, it just seals to the intake manifold. This one on top holds your fuel pressure. You don't touch that one, you leave it alone. So you take your LS3 fuel rail and you're going to put it on your injectors. As you can see, that end is exactly the same size. That O-ring fits in there nice and snug. Now the only problem is these injectors on the truck manifolds are a little bit taller. Well, like an inch taller. They're a lot taller. So here's your factory bolt. As you can see, because these are angled, it doesn't line up. So what I'm going to do is just bend that bracket a little bit so it lines back up with that bolt hole, that way we're not pulling on the injector sideways, and make a spacer and get a new bolt to go in there through the spacer, through that. There's 4 of those, so we got to bend 4 of those. 4 spacers and 4 bolts. And then that fuel system, the fuel injectors will be in, mounted, done. These will hook to my factory truck harness that I already have. Eventually we're going to be decapping these injectors, so basically you grind these little caps off, get you a lot more fuel flow for higher horsepower. That's a really cheap way to do it instead of buying new injectors, but we'll see how that works. But for now we're just going to get running with the stock injectors and get this thing together, see if we can get it to start up in the car. Alright, so got all the fuel injectors in the intake manifold. This is our fuel connection right here. I have an adapter to adapt this to a threaded fuel line. The Mustang quick connect is down there somewhere. We got to get to that. But next problem is, this is the truck throttle body right here, and this is our Corvette intake. So obviously they're not the same bolt pattern. This one's got 3 bolts, that one's got 4 bolts. Also, this isn't even going to fit here at all. So I think what I'm going to do is take it, and I don't know if I'm going to turn it 90 degrees or what, but we're going to have to weld a little aluminum box that bolts to the front of this, and this bolts to it. Alright, so I get this plate made up. It's just going to bolt to the front of this. I'm going to cut a big circle in it and match the size of the intake. And I think somehow we're going to get that to go right there, turn 90 degrees. Alright, so this is the solution I came up with for now. Not sure if I'm going to leave it like this, but I'm going to leave it like this just for now to run it. Might change it, might leave it, I haven't decided yet. But it's pretty much an adapter, so it bolts to the 4 bolts. The plate I showed earlier comes up and goes up because it would have hit this pulley, idler pulley here, and then it comes up and bolts in with the factory 3 bolts right there. That one's not in, but there's that. So we got a throttle body now. Hopefully tomorrow I can get fuel lines run, start working on electrical, and maybe we'll crank it up. We'll see how far we get, but that's it for today. Alrighty, so we got the throttle body adapter thing painted, sitting here, waiting for that to dry. Now I'm going to work on fuel system. So the way I'm doing this is I have these 2 quick connects here. So basically, the factory lines have a quick connect, kind of like, where did I put the factory Ford line? Right here. So these are the factory style quick connects on there. They're a real pain in the butt to get off. I don't really like them. These are the quick connects I bought to replace them. So if we unscrew, it's got this little retainer on here that keeps it from sliding off. If we unscrew that, we go over to the intake. So this is the fuel line from the LS3 intake manifold. So basically that slides on there like that, and then the other piece goes around from the back and you screw it in, something like that, and you screw that down till it's tight, and that keeps it from sliding off. So to get it off, you don't have to have the special tool, you just unscrew this. Now the Corvette intake manifold quick connect and the factory Ford one, which is right there running from the tank, they are the same size. So you buy the same size quick connect for both of them. See, that fits on there perfect. So we're gonna have one of those on each end. Those go to an AN connection. I have 2 AN fittings, which are right here. 45 is going to go on the fuel, the Ford side. This one, straight one's going to go on the intake, and some hose. So it's going to be a really short run. We're going to get that made up, get that on there, and that should be fuel line, fuel system done pretty much. Probably at some point going to have to update the pumps in the tank back there, but just to get it running, factory V6 pump should be fine. So the way these AN fittings work is there's this collar that unscrews off the back of this fitting here. So this is the 45. You're going to take that collar, you're going to put it all the way down on the hose. There's a little, well, you can't see it, but there's a little stop in there that it'll hit. And then you're going to screw this down all the way down tight. And you once that's in there tight, it's going to compress this hose between this, and you will not be able to pull this hose out of here, out of the fitting. So you turn that down, it's going to get hard here. You're going to crank it down with some pliers, get it nice and tight, do the same thing on the other end, and that's pretty much the fuel line done. Alright, so there's our fuel line done. Quick connect down there, quick connect up here. I haven't screwed the ends on, they're just sitting on there, but that's done. So now I'm going to pull the intake back off, get that thing with the throttle body put on it, get it all bolted down, finally bolted down this time. Make sure we have no open vacuum ports or anything weird like that we're not using, and then start getting wiring laid out on here. Alright, so there's that contraption all together and on. As you can see, everything goes through nice and good. So we're gonna get this on the car, start working on wiring. Alright, so we got the intake fully installed. I went ahead and pulled the coils off just so they were out of the way for the minute. I hooked the factory Ford starter wire that went to the V6, so that's hooked down to the starter. Ground is right here on the block. And then I was trying to get it just to turn over, just to make sure we can get it to turn over, and it wasn't. Turns out this little wire right here, this little yellow wire, is the key start power for the starter, and it runs through the main engine harness. So I'm going to be taking all the wire loom off this. We're going to be depinning all the stuff we don't need, just keeping what we need from the Ford harness. So this will be one of the things we need to keep. So it comes from either the computer or the fuse panel. I don't know where it comes from yet because I haven't taken this apart, but that has to be cooked up for the key to crank the engine. So now if we go into the car, clutch down, all the factory safeties are still here. So push the clutch down and you'll be able to hear the engine turning over. So there's that. We got it to crank. Now we'll get all the Chevy wiring harness laid out on the engine. Get the Chevy computer hooked up. We've got to hook up some powers on that computer to a key power and ground, and I think that is it, and some constant powers. But then turn it over like that, it should fire up. We should have fuel pressure. I'm going to check that in a second here. Got to get the coils put back on. But then theoretically, it should fire up. We can't run it long. We don't have any coolant in it. The lower hose is not hooked to anything right now. The part should be coming in later today, so maybe we'll get some coolant hose in, try and get some exhaust worked out, because obviously there's no headers on it either, so can't run it for more than a couple seconds, but just get it all together, verify that it runs, and go from there. Alright, so I got the headers mocked up on here. They were going to go down and forwards, but there's just no way that it's going to work. There's just too much stuff in the way, so they're going up and forwards. So this one is going from that side, and that side's the one from this side, and they're flipped over. Actually, no, they're on the right side. They're just flipped over. So this one was on this side and it's flipped over. That one was on that side and it's just flipped over upside down, so they're coming up and forward. Not sure what we're going to do with the exhaust and all that set up yet, but we'll figure that out later. I moved the fuse panel on the factory computer. Had to move it out of here because it was hitting this. I have to modify this hose so it's not touching, obviously, and get working on that. But what I'm going to do next is lay out the GM harness, start removing all the loom, pulling back the things that we're not using, and just trying to keep the things that are being used. Alright, so it looks like a disaster's happening here, but I've laid out the harness. I've started plugging things in that I'm going to be reusing. There's a lot of stuff that's got to be stripped out of this harness. Like all this stuff, this was for the 4060, that was because this was in an automatic car, so that needs to go. This is for a neutral safety switch, we don't need that. A bunch of this is for the AC stuff, we're not using any of that on this harness, so a lot of it's got to come out. I'm going to start taking all the loom off of everything, getting all the wires exposed, and start pulling back, not unhooking anything yet, but pulling back all the things that aren't needed, so it starts to thin out the harness and get a better view of what's actually going on here. Alright, so making more of a mess with the wiring harness here, but we're starting to get down to removing a bunch of stuff. So this pile over here was all of the transmission stuff, neutral safety switch, transmission plug, all that, so that's all gone. We got some more stuff here. These were for AC system, so all this is out. Basically the way I'm doing is I'm going, so I know this plug goes to the AC system on the truck, so I'll take this, say this blue wire, I'll follow it all the way back through the loom, all the way back to the computer or the fuse block plug over there. I'll cut it off at the fuse block, and then I'll just take it, and you can just pull this wire all the way out of the harness. So now this wire is out of the harness. I'll do that with this black one here, then this plug is gone. Now once I get everything removed and know that the engine runs still with everything that I've removed, I haven't removed anything that shouldn't have been removed, I will take all these cut off wires that are just cut off hanging here, and we'll de-pin them from the plug so they will be completely gone, like they were never there. All of this will get re-loomed, re-wrapped up, and it'll look like a stock harness again, minus all the stuff that we didn't need. So I'm going to keep working on that, getting everything out, and then once that's done, we'll get everything plugged in on the engine and try to do a quick test fire just to make sure it does still run with everything that's been taken off. So we have everything temporarily hooked up here just to crank it over. As you can see, my gas pedal is laying on the floor, but if I give this power right here on the fuse panel, this is our key on. You can see, you can move the throttle body with the gas pedal right there. And that should be ready to start. So we got to get fuel pressure from the Mustang, and we got to get a crank signal to the starter. And probably gonna need help because I don't think I can turn the key and stand out here at the same time. So see how it goes. All right, so we got power, we're hooked up. Now we're gonna see what happens. Turn the key. All right, so what's happening is the forward fuel pump is shutting off because it doesn't see a crank signal, because the forward crank sensor is not hooked to anything. So what I'm going to do is try to figure out which relay is the fuel pump relay and just give it power so the fuel pump just stays on, and that way we should be able to start it.